You're listening to a podcast from the BMA.
In December 2010, NHS Employers, which is the body that negotiates pay with the BMA and the Department of Health, announced a freeze on pay increments for all NHS staff in England for 2 years from the 1st of April 2011. This, of course, comes on top of the cost of living pay freeze that staff are already facing. Well, I'm going to talk about this issue in a bit more detail with Dr. Eleanor Traeger, who's Deputy Chair of the BMA's Junior Doctors Committee. Eleanor, can you just tell us precisely what NHSE are proposing?
NHS employers have proposed an incremental pay freeze for all NHS staff, but for the purposes of this interview we're going to be talking about junior doctors because that's who I'm responsible for in the Junior Doctors Committee. In return for this incremental pay freeze, they proposed a national framework during this 2-year period which ensured no compulsory redundancies for staff in Agenda for Change Band 1 to 6. Just to clarify, that doesn't affect junior doctors. Agenda for Change is the contract that applies to all staff across the UK who are employed directly by NHS organisations, except for very senior managers and medical staff. They also proposed best endeavours to avoid compulsory redundancies for all other staff, including doctors, that junior doctors would be guaranteed training opportunities, which of course they already should be anyway as part of their contract, that there would be no reduction in the current level of investment in clinical excellence awards for consultants, and that they would explore with Her Majesty's Treasury the possibility of deferring the increase in employees' contributions to the NHS pension scheme.
OK, well, thanks for that, Els. But I do understand that the BMA has actually rejected this pay freeze.
Indeed, they have. On the 13th of January, the BMA formally rejected the pay freeze proposal, along with all the other health unions, including the Royal College of Nursing, Unite and Unison. And that's because we believe that national terms and conditions for staff help to ensure a fair and consistent service across the NHS.
And so why do you think NHSE actually made these proposals then?
We've asked them this. They tell us that they're concerned at the scale of cost improvements that organisations across the NHS have to make during 2011-12 and 2012-13. In addition, they've identified a gap between available resources and the amount they say is needed to deliver high-quality care free at the point of use. There's a current funding shortfall of around £2.3 billion, and they've identified that incremental pay could be a way to save £1.8 billion of that.
So specifically then, how will these proposals actually impact on your average junior doctor?
So we've analysed the proposals and believe that they would have the following impact. Currently, already, all doctors in the UK have accepted a 2-year cost of living pay freeze for 2011-12 and 2012-13. And the initial analysis of this proposal is there was a potential for junior doctors to experience an annual effective loss of 3 to 10% of the basic salary per year. It would be different depending on which level of the pay scale you were at already before the pay freeze started. In addition, it's an England-only proposal, so there are implications for juniors who move between the 4 nations of the UK. And that's an issue because many juniors do move from Scotland to England, to Northern Ireland, back to England again. In addition, from 2007 to 2010, there was a real terms decrease in total earnings of 7.2% for junior doctors and 3.1% for consultants. And the majority of non-dispensing GPs have also seen a real terms decrease in their income before tax of 9.4%. Doctors are playing a key role in identifying and delivering efficiency savings across the NHS, and they're at the forefront of the current NHS reforms proposals for England. The BMA believes that doctors should not also have to accept an effective cut in their pay.
What about annual leave? Is there any specific impact on that in that area?
Currently, annual leave for junior doctors at the beginning of their career is 5 weeks or 27 days, depending on how your local employer calculates it, for the first 4 or 5 years of your career. After that, at a specific incremental point, you're allowed 6 weeks of annual leave or 32 days per year, depending on how it's calculated. This is clearly set out in Terms and Conditions of Service, paragraph 205. If there was an incremental freeze, then people who were just about to move up that increment and gain an extra week of annual leave would not gain that extra week, and that would happen for 2 years. This is a huge impact on junior doctors who would be then effectively working for free for another week for 2 more years for their employers.
Well, I think so far you've given us an indication of how the BMA actually feels about this, but could you just summarise for us the general BMA position on this issue?
The BMA position is similar to the other health unions, which is that it's not fair or sensible to expect doctors and other health service staff to personally bear the brunt of the £2.3 billion of extra savings the government has identified. Attacking frontline staff pay is the wrong approach to resolving the shortfall. And in addition to that, there are whole areas of NHS expenditure that seem to have special protection. For example, there are huge returns for commercial organisations on investment in new pharmaceuticals, in private finance initiative projects, and none of these things are being affected by the proposals from NHS employers. Also, the NHS is potentially about to embark on an expensive restructuring of the NHS in England, and the Junior Doctors Committee and the rest of the BMA are concerned about how these proposals would impact on junior doctors and feel the guarantees were not nationally enforceable and had little incentive to accept the proposals.
So turning to the practical side of this, what actually happens now that the proposals have been rejected?
So, foundation trusts have got the ability to implement local changes to paying terms and conditions through local negotiations. They would, however, have to negotiate that. They are not allowed to just impose a pay freeze. They should negotiate it locally through the local negotiating committee. We know that some foundation trusts have started to make plans to restrain pay progression or reduce terms and conditions with or without national agreement. We are aware that with the current financial pressures, it's possible there will be some medical redundancies, and we have heard reports of that. In the main, these do not affect junior doctors. They affect consultants and other grades. The government and employers have already made a commitment to minimising the impact on frontline services, and the Prime Minister has said that there will be no cuts in frontline staff. However, we're concerned that if these proposals go ahead locally, then we could end up with there being cuts on frontline staff, and that's something we would resist as much as possible.
What can junior doctors actually do locally about these proposals?
The most important thing you can do is make sure there's an accredited junior doctor on your local negotiating committee. This is the committee which negotiates between the hospital, employer, managers, the BMA and the doctors, and should have a space on it for a junior doctor in every hospital. Make sure that you know your rights and that you stand up for them, and get your contract checked by the BMA when you move into a new post. And you should seek urgent BMA advice if you're asked directly by your employer to consider an incremental freeze or in fact anything else which may affect your contract. It is important to recognise that the BMA is the officially recognised body which is able to negotiate with the Department of Health on behalf of doctors. If you're rotating to a new hospital, it's really important that you get your contract checked by the BMA. It's possible that your employer may try to introduce local changes through your contract at the point of moving. So the first thing you should do when you move into a new job is check your incremental date on your payslip and see whether you've passed your incremental date and you've been given that pay increment. If you haven't, ring payroll just to make sure there hasn't been a simple administrative error. If you think there hasn't been an error, then ring the BMA and they can step in at that point and help you.
Well, thank you very much for that, Eleanor. There is more information about this topic on the BMA website, and you can find that by typing in the address that is shown up on this slide.